Hello everyone, welcome to Advanced Planning and Control Week 2. This week we will focus on procurement. Almost all projects need to buy or procure some supplies, material, some training, for example, some books, some reference material, some consulting services, some equipment. These things are necessary for the work that we will do and the support for the project. That's why we need procurement process management, because procurement is a process, and this process will enable the team to purchase the needed material, the needed stuff, the needed goods and services to carry on the work related to the project. And procurement management involves planning. We need to have a plan to decide how we will acquire sellers' information, how we will administer different contracts, and how we will close these contracts. And in this program, we are focusing on the project manager as a buyer. Procurement also doesn't include only goods and services. It might include subcontracting. That's why we need a process to organize and define how the relationship between us as a buyer and the seller, whether it's a vendor, supplier, or service provider or subcontractor, how we will manage this relationship. In doing this, we might have some control mechanisms, of course, like the contracts, like purchase orders, like agreements, like memorandum of understandings, like bidding. And although the organization or the company might have a dedicated department for procurement, as project managers, we might need to have a member of our team or ourselves to be heavily involved in procurement management. And when we talk about procurement, we have to consider the legal context. So there are some legal obligations on the buyer and the seller, and this might involve some applicable penalties, for example. As I said before, we need to have some tools and mechanisms that will enable us to manage the relationship between us as a buyer and the seller. We have to specify and define deliverables, and we have to have a well-designed and articulated contract that specify terms and conditions. Because at the end of the day, the contract is a binding legal document, and it has consequences for us as buyers and for sellers. And of course, the procurement process is as complex as the project that we are managing. The more the project is complex, the more the procurement process and the procurement process management will be complex. And here we have two types of procurement processes. We have decentralized process and centralized process. Centralized process is when we have a dedicated department at the organization, and the project manager has to work closely with this department to purchase all the goods and services they need for the project. Decentralized procurement process, it gives the project manager some autonomy and some more relaxed and some higher authority to manage the procurement process. But either way, there are certain steps and certain tools and parts that should be included in the planning process, in the procurement planning process. When we have a centralized procurement process, the project manager might not have a full-fledged authority to negotiate contracts. In this case, the procurement department will manage negotiating contracts and qualifying sellers with the input of the project manager and the project team. Within the last few decades, we noticed some trends in the procurement management. And these trends are included in the best practice. For example, tool advancement. So right now we have some tools like software and applications that will enable us to manage the procurement process in more efficient and effective way. And also procurement has some elements of risk. So again, there is a trend to include advanced risk management in the procurement process, especially that the sourcing for material and services is shifting from domestically only to internationally. Contracts also started to have some best practices and some internationally accepted standards to design a contract, to manage the contracting process. And this will help the organization and us as project managers to manage the risk associated with the procurement, and also to minimize the chance for claims and problems. Also, logistics and supply chain management plays a role in procurement. Especially in large projects, the sourcing or the procurement might be internationally. We might have different contractors coming from different countries or regional areas. We might have consultants from other regions, and this adds some layer of complexity. But with the advancement in logistics and supply chain management, these things started to become, I'm not going to say easier, but there are ways to control it and make sure that this process goes smoothly as possible. Procurement is a process to manage the relationship between different stakeholders, buyers and sellers, and stakeholders of the project itself. So we need to manage the communication related to the procurement process. And here comes the advancements that happened in the tools and applications available to manage the procurement process. So one aim of these tools is to manage the communications related to procurement. Also, in some projects, you will find that there is what's known as trial engagements. And in these trial engagements, before committing to a specific seller or supplier or a vendor, or a consultant or whoever we need to procure some materials, goods and services from, we might try the service or the product. And these trial periods usually are paid, and we use these trial engagements to assess the capability of different vendors or different sellers to satisfy the needs of the project. Although we have best practices in procurement management, we still, as project managers, need to tailor the process to fit the specific needs of our project and the complexity levels of the project or the risks associated with the project. When we are planning for procurement, we need to consider the complexity, the procurement complexity. Because we will have different procurements happening at the same time. We might be sourcing for different goods, different products, different supplies, different services. Also, the physical location plays a great role on selecting the suppliers. We might have different time zones. We might be in different geographical regions. We might have complexities related to the location of the project. It's not easy to transport the material, for example, to this location. Also, the external environment, especially the regulatory environment, plays a role on how the procurement process will be complex and how this will affect our planning. So we need to understand the political and the regulatory environment that we are operating in. Are there any specific laws, for example, that will hinder our ability to source for some material or will force us to manage the procurement process in a certain way? In some other cases also, we might not have available sellers of this particular material or service, and this or we have a limited number of providers, or we might have an issue with the availability. So we select a contractor or a subcontractor or a service provider, but we have different timetables. They are available at times that we are not available, or vice versa. So the Project Management Institute designed a procurement model. The model includes three major elements. The first element is the stage of planning the procurement. So we need to document procurement decisions. We need to specify a type of approach to sellers, how we will approach sellers. We have to identify potential sellers. Then we go to the second phase, conducting procurement. So after we approach the sellers, we obtain responses from the sellers. We analyze these responses, and based on specific criteria, we select a seller and award the contract to this specific seller. But along the way, we need to control the procurement process. So we need to manage the relationship between us as a buyer and the seller. We need to monitor the performance. We have to benchmark the performance against the contract terms and conditions. We need also to make appropriate changes or corrections if needed, if there are some changes in the project and this will affect our requests. And at the end of the cycle, we need to close the contract and make sure that all the terms and conditions of the contract are satisfied. That's why the planning phase of the procurement process is very, very important. In this phase, we will design a procurement strategy. We have to come up with a statement of work. We have to have some decisions regarding whether we will make or buy. And of course, we have to prepare solicitation packages. So when we talk about planning the procurement process, we are talking about documenting the decisions that we took. We have to specify the approach that we will use to approach potential sellers. We have to have tools and mechanisms and methodology to identify potential sellers. In this process, we can also have a chance to determine and decide whether we will acquire the goods and services that we need from outside the project, or we will acquire it within. And how we will do this, and when we will do this. Also, the procurement might include internal departments. So we might approach, for example, the IT department, and we procure certain service or certain consultation or training from within the organization. But again, even when we are dealing with an internal department or another part of the organization, we need also to have some mechanism to control this process, the procurement process. And this planning phase is very, very important because there are so many decisions that we need to come up and to reach and to determine early on before starting the work on the project. And of course, the larger the project, the more complex the project, the more time we need to spend on procurement planning. We need to analyze threats and opportunities, especially if we are dealing with international sellers or providers. We need to design contracts suitable for these endeavors. We need to take into consideration some things like currency exchange rates, for example, pricing or volume discount if we will purchase bulk quantity. We might have also some legal aspects that related to sourcing internationally, and of course managing the work across different geographical areas, time zones. We have different regulations, different laws, and even different holidays, different culture, different language. And I had the opportunity to work in some international projects, and this culture differences is huge in managing such projects. And also in the planning phase of the procurement process, we need to think of the lag time. For example, we have to have the material or the services available at certain time. So we need to finish some steps of the procurement process before other steps. We need to plan logistics. We need to plan ahead of time what we need to procure. We need also to consider the inevitable delays in delivery, some quality issues of the material, some rework of some material or some supplies or some services. And also, if we decide to have some trial engagements, as I said before, we have to include this in our planning process. How long the trial engagement should be to reach a final decision, and we have the the supplies or the materials or the services procured and delivered before the work starts in the project, or before the work at specific step or in a specific stage of the project starts. And here, a word of caution. We shouldn't treat the relationship between us as buyers and the sellers as rivalry. Actually, we have to manage it as a partnership. And the vendors, the suppliers, the subcontractors should feel this, that we are dealing with them as our partners, and our success depends on their success, and vice versa. And you will find the Project Management Institute's model is somehow logical, you know, even in your personal life. When you think of purchasing something, you will go through these steps. So we need to create a statement of work. So this statement of work includes terms to reference or to describe what's going to be done, and what's going to be done will tell us what is needed to be procured or purchased. We will also determine the what's called the high level budget. So what is the budget estimate? It's a rough cut estimate of the budget that we need to procure all the material, all the supplies, all the services that this project needs. How we will advertise our needs to procure these services and goods. Also, how we will decide which seller to go through with, who will be qualified, so we have our contract with. So we need to have this statement of work and invitation to bid and deliver it to the chosen sellers. And once we have a proposal, and usually the proposal includes two parts, the technical proposal and the financial proposal. So the technical proposal includes the quantities, the specifications, the quality standards, and of course the financial proposal will include the cost of delivering these goods to us as a buyer, some payment terms and conditions. We might also need to negotiate these terms and conditions, whether technically, financially, or contractual, with the sellers, and use our planning phase to set parameters on this negotiation process. Because once we finalize the negotiation with potential sellers and we decide on the seller that we will commit to, we need to design a contract. And the final contract is a legally binding piece of paper, but it has huge consequences on both parties. And in the planning phase, we need to estimate the time that we need to conduct all these steps and relate this time to the project schedule. We also need to think of the available resources, the available cost, the available budget, and also the available technical skills that we have in-house that might save us some cost, and we have to design a process to decide whether we will make, buy, or rent a specific equipment or some service. So when we do the planning of the procurement process, we need to have some inputs. Like, for example, the project charter. If there are some business documentations, like the business plan, the business case, the plan that the management used to decide on this project. Of course, we will have the project management plan. We will have the scope statement. We will have a quality management plan, so we can decide on the quality standards. We need a resource management plan. So we need different project documents, like the milestone list, the project team, the different assignments, the schedule, the requirements. And of course, the risk, because procurement includes a heavy load of risk management. So we need the risk register. With these documents, we need to think of some factors that will affect our planning and in turn the procurement process. The project charter will include the high-level objectives. So these high-level objectives are factors that we need to include in our thinking. What we are aiming to accomplish, what are the milestones. We need to understand the budget allocated for this project. There are also technical and logistic requirements, like licenses, permits, like some technological advancements or some tools or applications or some technical requirements that should be included. And we need to have risk assessment of the procurement process. So these risks, who the owner of these risks, how we will respond to these risks, who will make decisions when how to deal with these risks of whenever we face it. We might also to ask other departments to be involved in the procurement process, especially the legal department or the legal personnel, because these contractual relationships has some heavy legal context. We might have fixed price or cost reimbursement. We might have a hybrid type of a contract. We need to include specific clauses. For example, the first phase of the planning is designing a strategy, a procurement strategy. In this strategy, we might use the decision of whether we will make or buy or rent a specific material or service to design a strategy on what type of the legally binding agreements that we will have, how we will advance the procurement, what phases that we will go through, how the goods and services will be delivered. For example, do you have a turnkey or design build or design build or design build operate or build your own operate and transfer? There are so many tools or different project delivery methods that we need to decide in the procurement strategy. Also in the procurement strategy, we might decide on the type of contracts or the types of contracts that we will use. We might use different types to acquire different materials or different needs or different services. Also, we need to decide in the procurement strategy how different teams will deal with each other from the buyer and from the seller. For example, for contract payments, we might have our financial personnel deal with the financial personnel at the seller. When we have technical issues, we have our technical team deals with the technical teams at the sellers. We might have different contract types in the project. We might have fixed price contracts. We might have cost reimbursable contracts. We might have time and material contracts. In fixed price contracts, the seller bears the risk of an overrun or underrun to the work. Buyer bears the risk of incorrect scope or schedule, and the price might have. We might have a firm fixed price. We might have a fixed price incentive fee. We might have fixed price with economic price adjustment. So when, for example, when the supplier or the seller deliver according to certain terms and conditions, we might have some incentive fees. If there are some economic fluctuation in the price, we might have a fixed price with specific adjustment for the price. For cost reimbursable contracts, buyer, that's us, bears the risk of underrun or overrun, and seller bears the risk of finding and providing resources. So we have cost plus fixed fee, cost plus incentive fee, and cost plus award fee. If the contract is time and material, the buyer, us, risk the high costs if more resources are needed, if we miscalculated our needs, and the seller risks of low profit if fewer resources are used than expected. So we only will pay for the time and the materials consumed. So contracts can include incentives and penalties for quality and schedule of deliverables. As I said, we need to design a statement of work. And this is very important because the scope statement for seller, it should be detailed enough for potential sellers to understand exactly what we are requiring. And it is a part of the project scope that should be outsourced outside to sellers. So sellers need to understand the requirements. It's also a description of the work required from the seller, or the resources supplied or the material supplied by the seller. So we have to have a description of work, and also we have to have a list of resources to limit or prevent subcontracting by the seller. And here to design the statement of work, we might have different techniques and different tools. Expert judgment, for example, is one of the techniques that we use. So we gather data, we analyze these data, we take some decisions, and we perform some assessment, make or buy or rent. Also, we will have some assessment or analysis to set selection criteria. We might have meetings at the beginning of the project, before we start the project, and during the work on the project, especially when there are some changes happening in the conditions or the statement of work of the project itself, or some risks arise, or some needs or some changes to the scope. We need to have these meetings to assess the procurement process. And to perform this expert judgment, we need to think of the individuals within the organization that has specific expertise, specific skills in relation to the procurement process itself, or the legal contracting, or compliance, or technical skills and expertise as well. And also, the planning process includes some sort of a market research. So we research the market, and we see the available reviews of different sellers and different suppliers from their clientele or previous clients. And this way we can understand the capabilities of the sellers. We might have phone calls or in-person meetings or conference calls with different sellers to assess their capabilities to be included in our list. As I mentioned several times in this lecture, that there will be times when we have to take decisions regarding whether we will make something or we will acquire it, we will buy it from a supplier, or we might rent it. For example, I used to work in a real estate development company, and it is so common to rent equipment. As a company, I don't need to bear the cost of acquiring a big piece of equipment, so I can rent it for certain time, do my work, finish it, and and I'm done. Sometimes we need to make something, for example, because it was cheaper to do it in-house. Sometimes we design some applications or a software in-house because it is cheaper to design it, or we might have the expertise or the tools, or we might have a similar tool that we can add some advancements or some more features. So the decisions to make or buy, in these decisions we think of all the options for obtaining these items or these services. So we can decide make or buy, lease or buy or rent, lease or rent. And also it includes whether we will acquire these items, whether it's goods or services, domestically, locally, or internationally. And these types of decisions are fundamental aspects of project management. So we need to have certain tools and methodology to enable us to come up with sound decisions. Is it more cost effective to buy? Is it more cost effective to make? And in some cases, it's not only related to the cost. Sometimes the lack of technical expertise will force us to take a specific decision. So we will conduct an analysis if we will make it in-house. We will do some analysis. For example, in the make option, what is the cost? What's the time commitment? Do we have the technical expertise needed to make it or not? And also we will assess the buy option. What is the cost? What is the support that we will get from the supplier? Do we have the technical skills or not? And then we will assess the difference between the make option or scenario and the buy option or scenario. And when I say buy, also the same process include renting and leasing. So the option that will be less costly, that we have the skills and the expertise in-house that will enable us to control the work, or we have the ability to learn new skills. We might not have all the skills. For example, if we need 10 types of skills and different expertise, we might have 8, but it's easy for us to acquire these 2 new skills. And also the availability. Is the staff available? Do we have the staff available for this project, the make piece? Because it's a project within a project. Do we have the time? Do the staff have the time available for this? How about their workload? And also, can they focus on their core work while working on making this option or delivering this make scenario? But also, there are some considerations that will force us to make instead of buy. For example, when we don't have available vendor, or the available vendors, they don't have the expertise required to deliver the work that we need. Or for example, when the scope of work is small, so it will be costly. And also we might choose buy because of the risk. So we want to transfer the risk to the seller. And all the time we have to prioritize competing demands. As project managers, we might face some competing demands, and we have to balance and prioritize and focus only on the core work related to the project. And we need to have a clear list of criteria and factors on how we will decide. For example, is it the low cost, the least cost only? And we choose the least cost when all the available sellers have somehow similar capabilities. They have expertise that are so close. They are not perfect substitution to each other, but they can substitute each other. But in some cases, least cost doesn't mean they are able to provide the work up to our standards. So we might choose another way of deciding on the sellers. Is it qualifications only, for example? Or is it a mix or a hybrid item or selection between the least cost with the highest qualifications? And remember the triangle in project management. We have the triangle: time versus quality versus cost. So we have to juggle these 3 elements to come into the right decision. And as we talked about the statement of work, we need to talk about the solicitation package. This is a package that we prepare in the planning phase of the procurement process, and we use this package to solicit proposals from the sellers. The package includes standard bid documents. It includes list of qualified sellers. It includes criteria used to evaluate sellers or selection criteria. Also, how to address sellers' questions. Will we do a bidder conference? Or we might have a different approach. We might have Q&A, and we share these questions and answers with all sellers. Also, the solicitation package should include the supplier payment plan and how the change requests will be managed. And here I need to talk about the bidder conferences, because I was part of many bidder conferences. Some went very well when the buyer or the project manager managed the bidder conference well. And in some other cases, it didn't go well at all. Bidder conferences are a gathering of all the sellers that we contacted with our needs, and it's their opportunity to come and ask questions. And in some places, when we have high corruption rates, these bidder conferences might be an opportunity for illegal way of vetting bidders. So we might choose other ways. For example, we ask sellers to send us their questions, and we share these questions with all sellers because we need to give everyone equal opportunity. So in the solicitation package, I said that we need to include bid documents. So these bid documents will provide some guidelines to the relationship between us as a buyer and the seller, how we will communicate, and these communications should be specific to the requirements and the expectations of the seller. And sometimes we include non-disclosure agreements, because by revealing our requirements, we might reveal some proprietary information or information that we consider sensitive about the project or the organization. So we might have non-disclosure agreement even before sending the bidding documents.